Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before starting the video, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button and give this video a like up. The energy in the room was unlike anything else. For years, Hearties had gathered in small groups, online watch parties, and town-style conventions. But this time felt different. The cast of When Calls the Heart was together again, not for a scripted scene. Not framed by the picturesque backdrop of Hope Valley, but as themselves laughing, embracing, and radiating the warmth that drew millions of viewers to them in the first place. It was as though the screen between the fictional frontier town and the real world had lifted, and fans were invited to step directly into the magic. Season 13 was on the horizon, found the promise of new stories hung in the air like lanterns glowing against the evening sky. Erin Kraka, glowing with her signature grace, entered the event hall to the kind of applause usually reserved for royalty. She had grown into the role of Elizabeth Thornton over the years. And fans didn't just see her as an actress, they saw her as the heart of the story. She paused as she took in the sight of hundreds of devoted Hearties holding up signs. Some with quotes from the show, some with heartfelt words of gratitude. Her smile, warm and unguarded, seemed to confirm what everyone already knew. This wasn't just a job. This was family. Beside her, Pascal Hutton swept in with her usual spark, drawing laughter almost instantly as she teased the crowd with an exaggerated wave, her quick wit bubbling through even before she reached the microphone. Kevin Smith, her longtime scene partner, followed close behind, and the two shared a knowing glance that sent ripples of amusement through the fans. Rosemary and Lee were, after all, the comedy and heart wrapped into one. And seeing them together again and again out of character reminded the audience why they had become one of the most beloved pairs on the series. Kevin McGarry received a roar of cheers that startled even him for a moment. His portrayal of Nathan Grant had been a journey-shy beginnings. Deep conflicts, and now a love story that fans were holding their breath for. He pressed his hand to his chest as though trying to quiet his own heart, and the sincerity in his eyes said everything. Season 13 would be big, and he knew the expectations were sky high. But here, in this room filled with loyal supporters, he looked less like an actor burdened with a weight of fan hopes, and more like a man humbled by the devotion of strangers who had become extended family. Chris McNally strolled in, and the crowd's reaction shifted into something softer, more tender. Lucas Bouchard had been at the center of both admiration and controversy in past seasons, his romance with Elizabeth sparking debates that sometimes felt larger than life. But tonight there was no division, only warmth. Fans held up candles, an unplanned but somehow unified gesture creating a glow that reflected in his eyes as he offered a small bow of gratitude. He seemed quieter than usual, almost reflective, but the kind of reflective that promised stories yet to be told. Jack Wagner, ever the gentleman, made his entrance with a smile that had charmed audiences for decades. There was something grounding about his presence. Bill Avery had been a cornerstone of the community, a moral compass in a town that thrived on resilience, and Wagner himself carried that same gravitas. He took his time greeting fans, shaking hands, making eye contact, though reminding everyone that this connection wasn't one-sided. The fans had given years of loyalty, and he was here to give back. The younger Castandria Brooks, Ava Grace Cooper, Yada Lily Miller, and others brought a burst of lighthearted energy to the event. They darted across the stage, giggling, whispering jokes into microphones, and delighting fans with behind-the-scenes stories that peeled back the curtain on Hope Valley life. The children of the show had grown up before the audience's eyes, and seeing them taller, more confident, yet still playful, was a reminder of just how much time had passed and how deeply the series had woven itself into people's lives. The event was designed not only to showcase the cast, but to celebrate the community. Hearties had traveled from across the country, some even from overseas, to be there. They wore Hope Valley-inspired outfits, prairie dresses, and suspenders, as though they, too, were part of the town. There was a sense of stepping into another world, where modern life faded away and what remained was friendship, faith, and storytelling. The cast began to share stories from filming season 13, carefully avoiding spoilers but dropping just enough hints to keep anticipation alive. Erin spoke about scenes that made her laugh so hard she had to step away from the camera, while Pascal described emotional moments that left the crew in tears. Kevin, with a boyish grin, admitted that certain romantic beats had made even him nervous, which drew a collective gasp from the audience. Was this about Elizabeth? About Nathan? The mystery only fueled the excitement. Fans leaned forward as Chris described one particularly intense day on set, his voice dropping low as if letting them in on a secret. He spoke of candlelight, stormy weather, the feeling that what they were filming would be remembered as a turning point in the show. He stopped short, smiling mischievously as the audience groaned in frustration. The playful withholding only made the atmosphere more electric. Then came the photo sessions. Fans lined up for hours, each getting their moment with the stars. What stood out wasn't just the smiles for the camera, but the genuine interactions. Erin bent down to hug children who clutched handmade drawings of Elizabeth. Kevin listened intently to stories of families who had watched the show together during difficult times. Pascal and Kevin cracked jokes with fans, making each person feel like an old friend rather than just a face in a crowd. The photos captured more than images. They captured the essence of connection. The reason why When Calls the Heart had endured when so many other shows had faded as the evening stretched on. A live band played music inspired by the show's score. Couples danced softly, children twirled in circles. And cast members occasionally joined in, blurring the line between performers and audience. Erin at one point swayed gently with a little girl in a white dress, both of them laughing as the crowd looked on, misty-eyed. It was the kind of moment that didn't need to be scripted because it was real. And sometimes reality was even more beautiful than fiction. When the lights dimmed and the event drew toward its close, the cast gathered together, arms around each other, facing the sea of fans one last time for the night. Erin's voice trembled slightly as she thanked the Hearties for their unwavering devotion. She reminded them that the show existed because of them, that every episode was a love letter to the people who believed in hope, love, and second chances. The room fell into a reverent silence, the kind that doesn't need applause, because everyone understood the gravity of the moment. And then, as if to seal the night with a promise, Kevin leaned toward the microphone, his eyes shining with emotion, and whispered words that would echo in fans' hearts long after the evening ended. Season 13 is for you. The cheers that followed were thunderous, shaking the walls, spilling over into laughter and tears. It wasn't just about a television show anymore. It was about belonging, about being part of something larger than oneself. And as fans filtered out into the night, clutching photos, autographs, and memories, they carried with them the unshakable sense that Hope Valley was no longer just a fictional town. It was here, alive and waiting for them. The cast lingered long after the fans left, sitting together in a quiet circle backstage. They shared their own stories, reflected on the journey, and admitted how much they had missed being together. The photos that would later be shared with the world wouldn't fully capture the intimacy of that moment. But those who were there, both cast and fans, knew that something extraordinary had happened. Season 13 hadn't even aired yet, but it already felt legendary. The morning after the Hearties event dawned with a kind of golden light that seemed fitting for Hope Valley itself, for fans who had traveled across states and even across oceans. The memory of the previous evening still pulsed through them like an ember that refused to die down. Many lingered in the hotel lobby, clutching tote bags full of memorabilia, comparing photos and swapping stories. There was laughter over spilled coffee, tears when someone described the hug they received from Erin Crocow, and that unspoken bond that comes when strangers realize they're connected by something greater than themselves. The cast, too, woke to a new day still glowing from the night before. Erin posted a candid photo on her phone, a simple snapshot of the cast together backstage, arms draped over one another, smiles unposed but genuine. The caption was just 3 words: "We are family." Within minutes, thousands of likes and comments poured in, fans echoing back the sentiment with hearts, prayers, and promises that they would stand by this show as long as it existed. Back in the private dining room reserved for the cast, laughter filled the air as plates of pancakes, fruit, and coffee were shared around the table. Pascal teased Kevin about his whisper the night before, joking that half the room had nearly fainted when he said season 13 was for the fans. Kevin, feigning innocence, shrugged dramatically, making Chris McNally nearly spit out his coffee in laughter. Erin shook her head at them, but the corners of her mouth betrayed her amusement. It was this dynamic, this effortless blend of humor and affection that made the cast's bond feel so real, both on and off screen. For the younger cast members, the event had been a revelation. Ava Grace Cooper, who had grown up before the fans' eyes, sat between Andrea Brooks and Yada Lily Miller, recounting the moment a fan handed her a hand-knitted shawl with her character's name stitched into the corner. "It was like being told you mattered," she said softly, her eyes wide with wonder. Andrea squeezed her hand, reminding her that the fans weren't just supporting the characters, but the people behind them as well. Later that day, a private panel was scheduled just for the Hearties who had purchased special passes. This was the most intimate part of the weekend, a chance to ask questions directly, to peel back layers and glimpse the human stories behind the roles. The room filled quickly, fans buzzing with anticipation, holding notebooks and cameras, ready to capture every word. The moderator began with a simple question. What had it meant to reunite after the challenges of the past years? Erin was the first to answer, her voice steady yet tinged with emotion. She spoke about the resilience it took to keep the show alive, the faith it required to believe in stories of hope during times when the world itself felt uncertain. She admitted that sometimes she wondered if people would still care. But each letter, each social media message, each fan gathering proved otherwise. Kevin leaned in to add his perspective, his signature humor laced with sincerity. "It's like coming home," he said, describing how stepping onto the set for season 13 felt less like work and more like a reunion with old friends. He painted a vivid picture of the first day back, how the familiar wooden facades of Hope Valley, the dust on the streets, and even the smell of pine from the surrounding countryside felt like a warm embrace. Fans nodded, some even wiping away tears, as though they, too, had stepped into that memory. Pascal, never one to let things stay too heavy for too long, broke the tension with a quip about costumes. How she'd somehow convinced wardrobe to let her keep an outrageous hat from season 12 rehearsals, and how her husband had rolled his eyes when she wore it around the house. The laughter was a reminder that this wasn't just about drama or romance, it was about joy, about the shared delight of telling stories together. When it was Kevin's turn, the room stilled. His journey as Nathan Grant had been long fraught with both fictional heartbreak and real-world pressure. He admitted he'd been nervous returning for season 13, aware of how invested fans were in Nathan's path. He paused, scanning the room, and then said quietly, "What keeps me steady is knowing you all believe in the story. Not just Nathan's story, but in hope itself." The words landed with the weight of truth, and the audience erupted in applause. Chris McNally followed, and though he was more reserved, his words carried equal impact. He reflected on how Lucas had been both loved and criticized, sometimes in the same breath, but how every layer of debate only proved that people cared deeply. "That's rare," he said, "to be part of something that sparks conversation, that makes people feel, that keeps them coming back year after year. It's a gift." The questions from fans ranged from light-hearted favorite behind the scenes pranks to profound inquiries about how the cast connected, with themes of forgiveness and faith. Andrea Brooks described how her role as Faith Carter had changed her own outlook on compassion, teaching her to listen more carefully in real life. Jack Wagner spoke about resilience, weaving in personal experiences that mirrored Bill Avery's steadiness. And when Erin was asked if Elizabeth would ever stop surprising her, she chuckled softly, then admitted that the character continued to teach her lessons about courage and love. As the session ended, the cast rose to a standing ovation. But instead of exiting quickly, they lingered. Erin crossed the stage to hug an elderly woman in the front row who had raised her hand but hadn't been called on. The woman whispered something into her ear that made Erin's eyes glisten. Later, fans would speculate what had been said. But in that moment, it didn't matter. It was a reminder that these events weren't scripted, that the connections being made were deeply personal and real. That evening, fans were invited to a photo exhibit curated from the show's archives. Rare behind-the-scenes shots lined the walls. Erin reading lines while holding a steaming mug of tea. Pascal mid-laugh in the snow. Kevin perched on a fence post with his uniform hat tilted precariously. Chris rehearsing lines with a candle in hand. Jack adjusting his costume with a mirror propped against a barn door. Each photo told its own story, and fans walked slowly, reverently, as though moving through a sacred space. The cast drifted through the exhibit, mingling quietly with fans, pointing at photos, and telling anecdotes that gave life to the images. One photo in particular drew a crowd, a candid shot of the season 13 cast gathered in front of the church. Their expressions unguarded, their arms interwoven. It was clear this wasn't a scene from the show, but a moment captured between takes. Kevin leaned toward a fan and said softly, "That was the day we really felt like we were back." The fan, misty-eyed, nodded, clutching the memory as though it were her own. By the end of the night, as fans filtered out once again, the energy had shifted from excitement to something deeper: gratitude. Gratitude for the stories told, the friendships formed, and the promise of more to come. The cast returned to their hotel, tired yet fulfilled, their bond strengthened by the very people who had gathered to celebrate them. In the quiet of her room, Erin sat by the window, looking out at the lights of the city below. She thought about how far the journey had come, how a single story about a teacher arriving in a frontier town had grown into something that touched millions. She thought about the people she had met that day, the stories of hope and endurance they had shared. And she knew, without question, that season 13 would not just be another chapter in a television series. It would be a continuation of a living, breathing legacy. The weekend was far from over. After 2 full days of panels, laughter, stories, and shared emotions, the Hearties event still had more to offer. By the third morning, the atmosphere had shifted. The initial excitement of seeing the cast had softened into something more intimate, more heartfelt, as if fans and actors alike were settling into the realization that this gathering was not just an event, it was a memory being etched into history. The morning began with a fan breakfast where attendees sat at round tables, adorned with wildflowers, each table hosted by a member of the cast. The buzz of conversation filled the room, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the clinking of teacups. Fans had the rare opportunity to speak one-on-one with the stars, not just to ask about plot lines or favorite episodes, but to share personal stories. At one table, Kevin McGarry leaned forward, his elbows on the table as he listened intently to a woman who explained how, when Calls the Heart had been her anchor after losing her husband, tears slipped down her cheeks as she described how Nathan's resilience mirrored her own journey of moving forward. Kevin didn't rush to answer. He simply reached across the table, took her hand, and said, "Then Nathan's story is your story too." The moment was quiet, powerful, and deeply human. Fans nearby dabbed their eyes with napkins, moved by the sincerity of the exchange. At another table, Pascal and Kevin were up to their usual antics. They playfully argued over who got to pour syrup first, with Pascal dramatically accusing Kevin of always hogging the spotlight, while he countered with mock indignation. The fans at their table were in stitches, and someone whispered, "It's like watching Rosemary and Lee in real life." Pascal overheard and winked. "That's because you're not wrong." Erin's table was filled with young fans, many of them aspiring teachers, inspired by Elizabeth's journey. They eagerly asked her questions about how she prepared for scenes in the classroom, how she brought warmth and authority to her character. Erin's answers were thoughtful, but she also turned the spotlight back on them, asking why they wanted to teach. One young woman spoke about wanting to make a difference in rural communities, her voice trembling with passion. Erin clasped her hand and said, "Then you're already living Elizabeth's spirit." The girl's face lit up, and the whole table applauded. Elsewhere, Chris McNally found himself in deep conversation with a father and son who had traveled from across the country. The father explained how Lucas had sparked conversations in their home about dreams, ambition, and redemption. Chris, often reserved in such settings, opened up about what the role had taught him about the complexity of second chances and the courage it takes to start over. He admitted that sometimes Lucas's struggles reflected his own doubts in life. The father nodded knowingly. And the bond formed across that table was unspoken but profound. The breakfast ended with spontaneous singing. Someone at Pascal's table began humming the theme song, and soon the entire room joined in. Voices blending in a chorus that wasn't rehearsed but felt perfectly natural. The cast joined in laughing, sometimes off-key, but the harmony was less about pitch and more about shared joy. When the last note faded, applause erupted, not just for the song but for the unity it symbolized. Later that afternoon, the cast gathered for a special Q&A session where fans could ask anything, no filters. The room was electric with curiosity. The first fan asked Aaron what scene in season 13 had been the hardest to film so far. Aaron exchanged a glance with Kevin, who chuckled nervously, and the audience erupted with speculation. Aaron finally answered, choosing her words carefully. There's a moment where Elizabeth has to decide how much of her heart she's willing to risk again, filming that scene. It wasn't just acting. It was real for me too. The audience gasped, and phones were raised to capture her words. Another fan directed a question at Jack Wagner, asking if he saw himself in Bill Avery. Jack leaned back thoughtfully before answering. He explained that both he and Bill had lived long enough to know that life doesn't go according to plan. But that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful. He added, the trick is to stay open to people, to second chances, to love. The wisdom in his tone left the room hushed, with many fans nodding silently as if committing the words to memory. The younger cast members answered questions about pranks on set. Ava Grace Cooper revealed that Kevin had once hidden her shoes during filming, and she'd had to run across set barefoot before realizing what had happened. Kevin raised his hands in surrender as the audience roared with laughter, insisting it was all in good fun. Moments like these reminded everyone that, behind the drama and emotion of the show, there was a family having fun together. When the Q&A wrapped, the cast prepared for the evening's gala, formal dinner, and dance that would close out the weekend. The ballroom shimmered with fairy lights strung across the ceiling. Long tables covered in linen and candles, and a small stage set for a live orchestra. Fans arrived dressed to the nines, some in gowns that looked like they'd stepped right out of Hope Valley, others in sleek modern outfits. The cast made their entrance like a royal court. Aaron wore a flowing navy dress that seemed to sparkle under the lights, while Pascal dazzled in emerald green, her laughter filling the room even before she reached her table. Kevin, looking sharp in a classic tuxedo, drew a wave of applause just by walking in. Chris, more understated but no less striking, offered a shy smile as fans clapped. Jack Wagner, timeless as ever, carried himself with a quiet confidence that spoke volumes. The gala began with speeches. But these weren't stiff or rehearsed. They were heartfelt reflections on the journey. Aaron spoke about gratitude, Pascal about joy, Kevin about courage, and Chris about hope. Each word wove into a tapestry that reflected not just the show, but the spirit of the community it had built. Dinner was served, and the room filled with the sound of clinking glasses, quiet conversation, and bursts of laughter. Fans marveled at how accessible the cast was. No one hid away. No one distanced themselves. Instead, the actors moved from table to table, ensuring that as many fans as possible had a personal moment. When the orchestra struck up the first notes of a waltz, the dance floor opened. Aaron was the first to step onto it, inviting a young fan to dance with her. The room applauded as the pair twirled gracefully, the joy on the fan's face unforgettable. Soon, Kevin joined in, spinning a fan around with surprising skill, his tall frame making him look like a hero straight out of a novel. Pascal and Kevin, of course, made a spectacle of themselves, deliberately over-dramatizing their moves until the crowd doubled over with laughter. Even Chris, who preferred to keep to the edges, coaxed onto the dance floor. Awkward but endearing steps cheered on by fans. The night stretched into something timeless. There were tears, there was laughter, there was the kind of unity that words struggle to capture. As the final song played, the cast gathered in the center of the floor, encircled by fans holding hands. The orchestra softened, and together cast and fans swayed as one, singing softly to the music. It wasn't just a gala. It was a promise that Hope Valley wasn't just on a screen, but alive in the hearts of everyone who believed in it. When the evening ended, fans lingered, reluctant to leave, while the cast stayed behind to hug, to wave, to whisper goodbyes that weren't really goodbyes at all. For though the weekend was ending, the story was far from over. Season 13 was waiting, and with it, new moments that would bring them all together again. And as the lights dimmed and the ballroom emptied, Erin stood with Kevin by the doorway, looking out at the fans filing into the night. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "This is why we do it." Kevin nodded, his eyes following the crowd, and replied, "Always for them." The final day of the Hearties event began with a kind of quiet magic. There was no rush in the air, no frantic scramble for autographs or photos, because by now, something deeper had taken root. Fans and cast alike seemed to know instinctively that this was a day for savoring. The energy that had sparked so brightly on the first evening had mellowed into a steady glow, like the embers of a fire that still warmed everyone gathered close. The morning opened with a panel called Stories from Hope Valley, where cast members were asked not just about the show itself, but about the personal stories they carried from their time on set. Erin was the first to share, recounting a moment during season 2 when she had felt uncertain about her place in the series. She admitted that stepping into the shoes of Elizabeth Thatcher, a character who had already captured hearts, had been daunting. But it was the fans' letters, handwritten notes filled with encouragement that reminded her she wasn't doing this alone. "Every time I thought I wasn't enough," she said softly, "you all reminded me that I was." The audience erupted into applause, and more than a few tissues came out of pockets and purses. Kevin spoke next, recalling the first time he and Pascal read together for Rosemary and Lee. He laughed as he described how they improvised half the scene, tossing lines back and forth until the room was roaring with laughter. He admitted that he knew, even then, that they had stumbled into something special. Pascal chimed in with her version of the story, claiming Kevin had nearly tripped over a chair in his eagerness, which made the audience roar. But as the laughter settled, she added more quietly, "From the beginning, it felt like we belonged here. And I think that's what the show has always been about, belonging." Kevin's story was quieter, but it lingered in the air long after he spoke. He told of a day during season 11 when he filmed a scene of Nathan alone, struggling with his grief. The cameras had stopped rolling, but he had stayed in the moment, sitting in the quiet, feeling the weight of the character's loneliness. He confessed that he had felt Nathan's pain in a way that went beyond acting, and that afterward, a crew member had quietly placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "That's why this matters." Kevin paused, swallowed hard, and then said, "I think about that moment every time I step into Nathan's boots." Chris's story was more unexpected. He spoke about a fan encounter, not at a Hearties event, but in an airport. When a young man had approached him, hesitant but determined. The man explained that Lucas's journey, his mistakes, his attempt to rebuild his life had given him the courage to face his own failures. Chris admitted that he had been stunned, unsure of how to respond, but that he carried that story with him to this day. "Sometimes," he said, "we forget that what we do on screen isn't just entertainment. It's a mirror. And when someone sees themselves in it, that's when it becomes powerful." Andrea Brooks shared a story that had the room both laughing and tearing up. She described filming a scene with one of the younger actors where the child had forgotten her lines and burst into tears. Andrea, staying in character, had knelt down and whispered encouragement until the little girl found her courage again. "That moment never made it to air," Andrea said, "but it didn't need to, because it was real. And that's the magic of this show, creates real moments between people." Jack Wagner closed the panel with a reflection that was more like a benediction. He spoke of legacy, of the way stories live on long after the cameras stop rolling. He reminded the fans that they weren't just watching a show, they were part of something that would outlast all of them. We're telling stories about faith, about love, about redemption. And those stories don't end when the credits roll. They keep going because you carry them with you. His words left the room hushed, filled with reverence, after the panel. The cast moved into a more relaxed session, autographs, photos, and informal chats. By now, the lines weren't just cues. They were gatherings of friends who shared snacks, swapped Instagram handles, and held each other's spots while someone dashed for coffee. It felt less like a convention and more like a family reunion where everyone had just met. As Erin signed a stack of books, she paused to ask a young girl if she liked school. The girl shyly nodded and confessed that she sometimes pretended to be Elizabeth when she played teacher at home. Erin's face lit up and she leaned down to whisper, "Then you're already a teacher in your heart." The girl beamed, and her mother wiped away a tear. Meanwhile, Pascal and Kevin entertained their line with impromptu comedy. They quizzed fans about their favorite moments from the show, dramatically reenacted small scenes, and even pulled a fan on stage to play Rosemary in a mock skit. The laughter spilled through the hall, drawing even those waiting in other lines to peek over and watch. Kevin, signing autographs with his usual quiet humility, listened to a teenage boy explain how Nathan had inspired him to pursue a career in law enforcement. Kevin's eyes softened as he handed back the signed photo and said, "Then you'll be the real Mountie." Nathan would be proud. The boy's chest swelled with pride as his parents snapped photos. Chris, more subdued, still gave each fan his full attention. When one woman handed him a hand-drawn portrait of Lucas, he stared at it in silence for a long moment before finally saying, "You see him better than I do." He hugged her, the sincerity in his voice evident. By afternoon, the cast gathered for the closing ceremony. Fans filled the hall one last time, the air tinged with both joy and sadness. The weekend had been more than they imagined, and letting it end felt almost unbearable. The cast took the stage together, standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces reflecting the same mix of emotions. Erin stepped forward first, thanking the fans with a voice that trembled but never broke. She spoke of the journey from season 1 to now, of the trials and triumphs, and how none of it would have been possible without the Hearties. She ended with words that drew a standing ovation. Hope Valley isn't just a place on screen. It's a place we carry in our hearts. And as long as you keep believing, we'll keep building it together. Pascal followed, her usual wit softened with emotion. She admitted that she had come to the weekend expecting fun, but had left with something deeper. "You don't just watch us," she said. "You lift us. And I promise we feel it every single day." Kevin, visibly moved, kept his words simple but powerful. "You've made Nathan's story matter. You've made my story matter. Thank you." Chris, though quieter, spoke of gratitude too, his words halting but heartfelt. "I've learned that Lucas is more than me. He belongs to you too. And I'll do my best to honor that." Jack ended the ceremony with a kind of final blessing. "This isn't goodbye. It's never goodbye. It's just..." Until next time, the cast joined hands, bowed together, and stood as the fans erupted in cheers. Some rising on chairs, some waving banners. All of them united in their love for the show and the people who brought it to life. As the event officially closed, fans trickled out slowly, reluctant to leave the cocoon of warmth and community. The cast lingered too, hugging, laughing, taking last-minute selfies with staff and crew. There was a sense that none of them wanted the weekend to end because they all knew how rare this kind of magic was. Later that evening, long after the fans had departed, the cast gathered in a quiet hotel lounge. They ordered pizza, shed their formal clothes for sweatpants and hoodies, and curled up in couches and chairs like family at the end of a holiday gathering. They reminisced about the weekend, replaying moments that had touched them. Erin described the little girl who wanted to be a teacher. Kevin spoke about the widow he'd met. Pascal imitated fans' reactions with her usual flair, and Chris listened quietly, occasionally adding his own reflections. At one point, Erin raised her glass of sparkling water and said softly, "To Hope Valley on screen and off." The others clinked their glasses with hers, And for a moment, the room fell silent. Each person reflecting on what this journey meant. Season 13 hadn't even premiered yet. But it already felt alive, already felt bigger than any script or camera could contain. Because in that moment, in that lounge, in the memories of that weekend, Hope Valley wasn't just fiction. It was real. The Hearties event pressed on with the steady rhythm of something both monumental and intimate. As if time itself slowed down to let every moment be savored. The cast found themselves shifting in and out of conversations, laughter, hugs, and photo sessions, weaving a living tapestry that celebrated not just a television show, but the relationships that had bloomed because of it. Some fans had traveled across states, even across oceans, to be in that ballroom. And the gratitude that radiated from the actors as they met these devoted faces was almost overwhelming. It was as though Hope Valley had transcended the screen, pouring itself into reality, filling the air with an invisible warmth that wrapped itself around everyone present. Erin, a Crago, moved gracefully through the crowd. Her smile bright but never rehearsed, always authentic. She paused to kneel beside a young girl dressed in a miniature version of Elizabeth's iconic teacher outfit, blue skirt, high-collared blouse, and a ribbon carefully tied in her hair. The little girl's eyes shone as Erin listened intently to her words, as if the world had disappeared and nothing mattered more than this child's small voice. The girl's parents stood nearby, teary-eyed, whispering how much the show had given their daughter hope during her illness. Erin reached out, held the girl's hands, and the entire room seemed to grow still, reverent, as though witnessing something holy. Later, people would speak about that moment, how it wasn't a scene from a script, but it felt more powerful than any episode could capture. Nearby, Kevin McGarry and Chris McNally stood shoulder to shoulder, talking animatedly with fans who teased them about their on-screen rivalry. Kevin, with his easy humor, leaned into the jokes, mimicking dramatic stares and mock duels, while Chris played the charming counterpoint with witty retorts. Together, they brought the banter that fans adored, but underneath the laughter was a genuine bond. They weren't just co-stars playing rivals, they were brothers forged through years of shared scripts, long filming days, and the unique experience of carrying storylines that meant so much to millions. When a fan asked them to pose as if Elizabeth were about to choose between them again, the two men exchanged a conspiratorial grin, draping their arms across each other's shoulders instead. The room erupted in laughter, the joke clear. In real life, there was no rivalry, only deep camaraderie. Pascal Hutton and Cavan Smith found themselves at the center of another pocket of joy. Their connection, so natural on-screen, was magnified in person. They teased each other endlessly, like siblings who knew every button to push, but also every way to soften a moment. When a fan asked them about season 13, Pascal tilted her head dramatically, pretending she couldn't possibly reveal secrets, while Cavan exaggeratedly mimed zipping his lips shut. But then, with a wink, Pascal whispered that there might be a little more mischief than usual this year, sparking playful speculation. Fans clung to every word, knowing that even the tiniest hints would fuel weeks of theories and discussions online. As the evening unfolded, Melissa Gilbert entered the spotlight for a surprise panel segment. The crowd gasped when her name was announced and when she walked onto the stage. Her presence carried a kind of history that transcended even when calls the heart. She spoke about storytelling, about the power of creating characters who could inspire people across generations. She shared a tender memory of working alongside Robert Redford in her youth, reflecting on how those early experiences shaped her understanding of collaboration and artistry. When she linked those reflections back to Hope Valley, it's the way Hearties had embraced the show as more than entertainment. The room erupted in applause. It was clear her addition to the cast had opened doors not just for new storylines, but for layers of wisdom that enriched the entire ensemble. Through it all, the cameras clicked constantly, capturing every laugh, every tear, every sparkle of light that danced across the actors' faces. These photos weren't just promotional material, they became evidence of something alive, something unrepeatable. A hug between Erin and Pascal, a candid smile from Kevin as he bent down to sign a fan's program. A quiet moment when Chris crouched to speak with an elderly woman who clasped his hand as though she'd known him all her life. Each image would later ripple across social media, reminding those who had attended of what they'd felt and giving those who hadn't a window into the magic dot as the night deepened. The cast gathered on stage for one final group moment. The sight was breathtaking. A line of beloved faces, arms around one another, laughter bubbling as fans cheered and waved banners with their favorite characters' names. Erin spoke softly into the microphone, thanking the Hearties for believing in Hope Valley, for keeping it alive year after year. She didn't read from a script. Her words came from her heart, warm and trembling with emotion. "You are the reason we get to keep telling these stories," she said. "You are the heart of Hope Valley." And for a moment, the audience wasn't just applauding a show, they were applauding themselves, their community. The shared belief that kindness, resilience, and love still had a place in this world. The applause was thunderous, long and unrelenting, echoing until it felt like the walls themselves hummed. The cast bowed together, and though the event was winding down, it was clear that its spirit would linger. In every photo, every story retold, every memory etched into the hearts of those who attended, the Hearties event would live on. Season 13 hadn't even premiered yet. But in that ballroom, it had already begun, not with a script, but with real people, real connections, and the kind of unshakable bond that can only be born when fiction and reality embrace.